Good afternoon, co-chairs Funfara and Rojas. I believe Vice Chair Meskers is here, and Ranking Member Davis, and very distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. I appear here today in opposition to HB 5040, which you've heard a lot about here today. If passed, this bill would result in the triple taxation of Connecticut's residents. As you've heard about the sales tax and the federal excise tax, this would be an additional tax. Adding another tax is just one more straw on the backs of those exercising their constitutional right, choosing not to be a victim and honing responsible gun ownership and use, thereby reducing possible potential accidents. Furthermore, when such a tax is examined in the context of Connecticut's recent history of overzealous gun legislation, I can't help but see its likeness to a poll tax, penalizing lawful behavior that those in power disagree with and wish to repress. And that's unfortunate. This new tax would hurt Connecticut's businesses, as people wanting to purchase ammunition will merely do so in other states. This new tax would hurt competition shooters, such as those that compete in competitive rifle shooting, a female-dominated sport. It's one of the only sports that men and women compete against each other shoulder to shoulder. And if you knew anything about competition shooting, you'd know that most women win. I've experienced it myself. This new tax would hurt regular citizens of our state who just want to be able to protect themselves. I know the proponent of this tax has represented an intent of the legislation to secure funding for gun violence prevention and reduction efforts. However, I meet that representation with much skepticism. Even if I were to accept the morality and efficacy of such a tax, which I do not, what specific groups would be funded? Would it be the CCDL, the Connecticut Citizens Defense League, 35,000 strong, that just last session successfully advocated for our Department of Education to develop a curriculum to be available to our municipalities to be able to teach children gun safety and to stay away from guns? Would it be the NRA, which for 30 years now has been the proponent of the Eddie Eagle gun safe program? Stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. Are you going to fund those programs? I think not. I fully believe that these monies will be merely funneled back to the very anti-gun organizations that support this tax and other measures suppressing our constitutional rights. Talk about quid pro quo. And with that, if you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Fishbein. Representative Paletta.
Good afternoon to my good colleague, Representative Fishbein. Obviously, as you know, we serve together on a number of committees, but certainly intriguing and interesting and educating to have you here today before this committee. I will admit I don't know much about this topic, but I'm sitting and trying to listen. You and others have mentioned constitutional rights. To your knowledge, does Connecticut have its own constitutional provision protecting the private right to firearm?
It actually does. Most people, you hear about the Second Amendment. A lot of people have mentioned the Second Amendment here today. But a lot of people in this building don't even realize that Article 1, Section 15 of our Connecticut Constitution says that every citizen has a right to bear arms in defense of himself and the state. It's amazing. I teach gun safety every weekend. Teach about 70 people on average every weekend. And I asked them, I asked the room, did you even know that it was in our Constitution? I've never had anybody raise their hand. I mean, I've been steady with that sort of level of teaching for about 2.5 years now, and I have never had somebody acknowledge that they know that. And that's unfortunate in and of itself, but yes, to answer your question.
And you mentioned responsible gun ownership and reducing potential accidents. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, the classes that I teach, I advocate practice. When somebody gets a pistol permit and they're out in public with a firearm they're not comfortable with, they haven't practiced with, in my opinion, they are potentially harmful to themselves, perhaps others. One has to practice. In order to practice, one must have ammunition. And this tax would just preclude individuals from being able to do that really necessary practice to hone their skills. I got to tell you, I used to be anti-gun. I used to be one of these branders. I used to think that nobody should own a firearm. And I've changed over the last 20 years. Diametrically different, I think. But that's what I meant by that.
Thank you. And lastly, the beginning of the hearing, the proponent had mentioned that an intent to prevent gun violence. That's why we're, putting this tax on. And surely illegal guns are part of gun violence. Are you aware of efforts by the state to try and prevent illegal gun trafficking and the funding of illegal gun trafficking?
Well, I can tell you, I'm a member of the Connecticut General Assembly Conservative Caucus, and this year and last year we put in a bill to reestablish the funding of the statewide gun trafficking task force, which was actually created in 2000 by the legislature. I'm going to be quick. Created by this body, the legislature, to try and prevent illegal guns from being on our streets and things like that, source of gun violence, in my opinion. That task force has not been funded for, I believe, 8 years now. And, unfortunately, that bill went to the Public Safety Committee. They didn't see fit to prevent gun violence. I would hope that the proponents of this bill would get behind funding the gun trafficking task force with that real intent to try and prevent gun violence. So I think the state's not doing enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Representative Fishbein. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Donald Palmer, followed by